G'day, welcome back to the channel. Now I want to address some of the comments that were placed on my last video. Nearly 500 comments on that video the last time I looked, and I have read every one of them and I've responded to most, so probably 200 of the comments in my responses, because I think it's important that we discuss this. It's not just a case of me saying something, you listening, and then me going and do something else. No, I want your feedback. I want to be able to be fully aware of what you guys think, because I'm hoping that in a way I represent you, because you don't have the time to go banging on the doors of regulators, and the national model flying bodies, the only time they turn up is to collect their 13 pieces of silver for selling you out. So I want to address some of the comments, the things that people have said. The most obvious one is a lot of people have said, well, Mikey's the author of his own misfortune. The FAA gave him plenty of time to reform, to stop breaking the rules. You know, they bent over backwards to try and make sure that he became a compliant drone flyer. And on the face of it, you'd say, yeah, that's right. You know, Mikey, 2 years. He had 2 years to stop flying BV loss, to stop flying at night, to stop flying over Philadelphia, all the things apparently that he was doing wrong. He had 2 years to stop that, and he didn't. So what the hell? But if you stop and think about this a bit more, this is a very interesting situation. Now, the FAA assert that the regulations Mikey broke are crucial. They're crucial to preserve safety. Absolutely crucial. You can't fly BV loss. It's far too dangerous. It endangers people, endangers lives. You can't fly at night over a city for whatever reason. You can't do a lot of the things that Mikey was doing. It's all way too dangerous. That's why we have rules. That's why we have regulations. Yet, the FAA allowed Mikey to continue doing that for 2 years. Hang on a minute. Surely the FAA's job is to protect the safety of airspace users and the people on the ground below. Yet they knowingly allowed Mikey to continue breaking these regulations? Have they not been derelict in their responsibility as the safety, aviation safety people? Why would they do that? Well, there's only two reasons that they would let Mikey continue for 2 years without actually stopping him. The first one is that they don't give a damn about air safety. They don't care that people were endangered. They don't care that aircraft were endangered. They don't care that buildings were endangered. No, they don't care. Is that the situation? No. There's a more obvious situation. They're effectively admitting these regulations were broken, and we didn't care because we know that the intrinsic risk associated with the recreational use of multi-rotor drones is incredibly low. Lower than any other form of aviation. We know that our regulations are excessively restrictive in light of the actual risk that has been proven over a period of 10 years or more. So we were quite happy to allow Mikey to continue flying because we knew the risk to the public, the risk to other airspace users, the risk to property was absolutely minuscule. And by allowing him to continue for 2 years, the FAA got to use the strategy that I've mentioned before that is so common in bureaucracies. They allowed Mikey to dig a really deep hole so they could throw the book at him and make an example of him to have a chilling effect on the behaviour of others. So they wouldn't have done that if they thought that the public was in danger. They knew that there was no danger from Mikey's tiny drones. But they let him dig that hole so they could then fine him up to $182,000, and when he couldn't pay that, take the hobby away from him, take away his drones, and force him to close down his YouTube channel. That's the way things work. So to all those people who said it's Mikey's own fault, the FAA had a plan. They've acknowledged that the use of multi-rotor drones and the way Mikey used them, not really dangerous at all, or they would have stopped him right from the get-go. And Mikey's only flaw was he fell into the trap that they wanted him to continue so they could throw the book at him. That's the way they work. I've seen this happen so many times before in so many different aspects of human endeavour. And that's why I predicted it would happen. And that's exactly what happened. It's very sad, it's very unfortunate, but that's just the way bureaucracies tend to work. And that's why we're facing a battle with regulation. They don't want to do any work. I'm not blaming them. Human nature is you do the minimum amount of work possible. And of course, you've got to warm a chair, you've got to drink coffee, you've got to eat donuts. It doesn't leave much room in the day for enforcement. But to be fair, the FAA doesn't have a lot of feet on the ground for enforcement. The FAA had sufficient numbers not even enough numbers to properly enforce their regulations within the manned aviation community. And then they got the entire drone community thrown into the mix. And there's far more people with drones than there are with airplanes, manned aviation. So the FAA wasn't given a whole lot more resource. So they had to do something, and they just chose that simple bureaucratic hack to do what they did to Mikey. And he, unfortunately, was unaware and walked straight into it. So that's the main comment I wanted to address on that video. Think about it long and hard. But again, as I say, it points out to the fact that regulators are aware that the current regulations tend to be over-restrictive and not really based on the true risks associated with what we do. But they don't want to change anything because that involves work. Look at the NPRM over remote ID. How much work did the FAA have to do to go through those 56,000 submissions? It's a snot load of work to change a rule. However, you can do other things. Now, we need to address this war one battle at a time. I think the battle we should choose, the first battle we should choose, is the one relating to visual observers and FPV, because it's the one thing that all FPV flyers do, either regularly or at some stage. They fly without a visual observer in breach of that regulation. Now, as a result, nobody has been injured, nobody has died. That, as to my knowledge, there hasn't been any serious property damage. Before you say, oh, what about the Palisades? That wasn't because the guy didn't have a visual observer. That was because he flew BV loss. A visual observer still wouldn't have helped because the drone wasn't visible. So that's not a visual observer issue. That's a BV loss issue. Totally separate situation. We need to basically twist the arm of the regulators to allow us to fly FPV without a spotter when it's safe to do so. I'm not saying we should always be able to fly without a spotter, because sometimes it's just not safe. It's not safe. But who gets to make that decision? Someone sitting in a glass tower in the middle of a big city when they're writing rules, or the person who's there on the day, on the spot, aware of every variable that might make a difference between whether you need a visual observer or you don't? I would argue it's the latter. Regulators seem to argue it's the former. We must change that. So I'm going to go to all the regulators and say, you must either change the rule regarding visual observers and FPV, or make a public statement in respect to your enforcement policy. Because a lot of people say, oh, no one would ever, the regulator wouldn't prosecute you for flying your 20-gram tiny whoop in the garden FPV without a spotter. And chances are that's true. But if that is the case, let them say so. Let them say so that we know that we can do that without fear of being, fined or having the hobby taken away from us. We need that statement. It's very hard to change rules because you've got to go through an NPRM process and it's complicated, but regulators can very easily simply make a policy statement saying, in respect to the rule regarding visual observers and FPV, we will only be enforcing that rule when we find that someone has flown FPV without a spotter when it was not safe to do so. That's all you've got to do. Then they've got to prove there was a risk to people if you were doing that, and then you get a fine or whatever is necessary. But it allows you to do things that are safe without fear of being prosecuted. And that's our first battle. That's our first battle in the war against regulatory reform. So let's get into it. Now, I have asked, I'm going to try and interview all the regulators. I tried to get our own Civil Aviation Authority here in New Zealand to front up for an interview. They declined. And it really annoyed me because they weren't honest. They just bullshitted. The reason they wouldn't front up, let's face it, is because I'm going to ask them questions they cannot sensibly answer without acknowledging the inadequacy of the regulations right now. The fact that regulations are overbearing, out of date, and no longer risk-based. They don't want to have to do that. So it's much easier for them to say, no, we're not going to front for an interview because we feel that would give you unreasonable influence on the shaping of new regulations. Well, that's bullshit for a start. If asking a question allows me to unreasonably shape the future regulation, it only does so because it forces the regulator to the realization that their regulations are crap. And they don't want to take that risk. But I will be contacting CASA, I'll be contacting CAA UK, the FAA and Transport Canada. I want to speak to representatives from them. I'm going to put these questions to them, get them to justify why, except perhaps in the case of Transport Canada, they are demanding that we do things that have no role in safety. And asking them to make that policy statement that legalises us doing things that are totally safe, even if they are technically infringing a regulation. It's a simple thing to do. It's a thing they must do. If they don't do it, then we really have to start asking questions further up the food chain. So that's it. That's my little video for today. I hope that is, is food for thought. And as I say, do comment, because I do read the comments, and it is a discussion. It's not me talking at you, it's me talking with you. So I relish your feedback. I'm not a regulator. Regulators tend to talk at us. I mean, so many times the FAA has put a tweet out on X, and I've asked a question and they have never responded, because they talk at people, not to them or not with them, at them, and that's unacceptable. You cannot expect to regulate a community unless you're willing to engage with them in dialogue, and that's what I intend to do. Of course, you know, I'm spending way too much time on these videos regarding regulation, which really, you know, as far as YouTube's concerned, they don't earn any money. The ad returns on videos like this are crap, because no one wants to advertise on a video like this. So if you feel inclined to support me in organising the war against over-regulation, I have Patreon, link in the description. I don't mention this often, but I feel I will now. Or you can go to channel membership, link in the description. Or if you can't be bothered or you don't want to, that's okay too, because this is a war that I will fight regardless. Just a point of mention, in my last video I pointed out that 76 people had died in manned aviation incidents so far this year in early February, and now that's gone up to 86 with the very sad loss of an aircraft in Alaska. And this is simply to show that manned aviation is dangerous, and to remind you that what we do, the recreational use of multi-rotor drones, is it is the safest form of aviation there's ever been. Not one single death attributed to our actions. So we really have to push back the regulation. It's ridiculous. Anyway, thank you for watching. I won't drone on. And I'll catch you in the next video, which hopefully will include something far more interesting than this bald guy talking to you on YouTube. Bye for now.